snap.
Welcome everybody to episode 37 of Born to be Cosmo, a Marvel Snap podcast where we talk about all things Marvel Snap. We record on a kind of flexible recording schedule, as Blue Train would say. Yes, I'm winging the intro today. Blue Train unfortunately cannot be with us tonight, but I'm joined by a couple very good friends, ZombiesGoNomNom, and very special guest, SafetyBlade. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. How are you tonight?
Good. Doing good.
Excellent. So we have two rank number 1 players here, and I'm sitting over here, and I haven't hit infinite yet, but it's okay. I'm excited to be here. It's been a little while since we've recorded, but real life has been busy. I was out of town on vacation and came back and got sick, so I'm all better now, mostly. But here we are. We have had quite a bit of changes over the past couple weeks, but I think the big ones that we'll be talking about tonight are Arishem is a card. It is a big, crazy card, and we just had an OTA a couple of days ago, and so we'll be talking about those things. And yeah, I'm excited to be here tonight. So let's just jump right into it. I'm going to pull up this. Well, what do we want to talk about first? This new card or the OTA? I guess the new card, maybe.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, we could just get the OTA out of the way quickly, because I think the Arishem discussion is probably going to be like the longer discussion. Whereas I don't think there is a crazy amount to say about the OTA, even though there were a fair number of cards changed. Like the actual changes here that were impactful were relatively smaller.
Yeah.
All things considered,
we can go through it. I mean, some of it is faster than others, but yeah, we can do the lightning round OTA discussion. So
yeah, we'll blitz through the ones that don't really matter, and then we can talk a little bit more about the ones that do.
So Hydra Bob is a
yeah, all right. Less consequential changes. Hydra Bob going from a 1/4 to a 1/5. The most interesting thing about this change was the fact that they actually told us about it like an hour or two before Bob left Spotlights. And I will give some props to the community manager for that one, because that was their call and they decided to ask about it and got some feedback, and they did it. And I think that is good. I wish it had a little bit more lead time, because obviously not everyone's terminally online and sees that in that short window, but it's better than nothing, because that's one of the biggest pain points of buffing a card right as it leaves Spotlights. It's not going to be back for like 6 months most of the time.
Right.
So it's nice to let people know about that ahead of time for those who are interested, and it resulted in me getting Hydra Bob, even though I have barely played him.
Yeah, I wanted it just because there's a Venom.
The Venomized.
Yeah, but like, and I like the card when I get it in Arishem. It's a neat card, but like,
it's great when you don't have to put it in your deck. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of cards like that.
Can I talk about Hydra Bob actually?
Oh, please.
Yeah, I want to talk about Hydra Bob.
Sure.
Because the buff, I actually feel like the card's still as terrible as it was before the buff.
But Cerebro 5 safety.
Cerebro. But I'm completely fine with them buffing it. But it continues to set a concerning precedent for me, which I don't really like necessarily. That I don't actually like that they buff cards so quickly sometimes. I feel like that creates the FOMO, and it comes across.
Yeah, that's
to me
why
like
they do it.
I know it's why, but I just would prefer if they didn't do that. Like,
it's fair.
Yeah, but if you're gonna buff it next time round when you're selling it again, rather than what they were going to do, like you mentioned. Like the community manager made a decision which actually helped a bunch of people who might have been interested. But what they were gonna do was just buff it and let it go, and then like
they've always done.
Yeah, like that's horrible in itself. So they have improved, but this whole if the card's bad, we're going to buff it until it's playable, then we're going to nerf it again sort of cycle
it's weird.
We go through.
It feels like it's one of those things that's caused by like this idea that they want every card to be playable, which is like a noble goal, but I think it's also super unrealistic.
They're watching their sales data.
Yeah. Something clicked for me this time where it was like, if this was a Series 2 card, they would never have buffed it. They would have just said, oh, it's early pool, it's there for experience. So it really sits wrong with me a card like this got buffed. Like, it's just so weird.
Even a lot of
And the way
Series
the
3
patch-
cards, like Arrow.
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, they're not gonna.
It's
If
unfortunate.
that came out today, if Arrow came out like she did today, they'll buffed it to all cards within a week.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
but because it's not, it just doesn't. It just shows a bit of the real motivation sometimes, but also like, yeah, look, it's totally fine. I actually think they baited a bunch of people into buying the card. It's still
Yep.
bad.
One of those people is
But-
me, and yep, I kind of agree. I mean, I'll give it this. I think it is now a better card than Martyr, but it's a low
Yes.
bar.
Oh yes, yes. It's definitely look. It's one of the better 1/5s you could put in your deck now.
Yeah, like I could see myself trying this in a zoo deck or like that Dracula dump kind of deck, and
Yeah.
it's not
It
the worst
has-
card in the
it has
world.
more
It's just
play.
like when you're comparing it to every other new potential Series 5 card, it's not a priority for a lot of people, and 1/4 to 1/5 didn't really change that. And I don't think anyone really expected it to.
I think the card is fine. It's just not 6,000.
Yeah,
Like
it's a Series
6,000
4 card with
tokens,
a Series
fine.
5 price tag.
Yeah. It's
I just have a personal opinion they shouldn't be playing with this space really either. Like this.
Oh, you
synergizing
don't
with
like
snaps. It's just-
the snap?
I'm not a huge fan. I know that's not everyone's opinion, but I just don't think it's that great. But I did work out. I was playing it in a never to be seen deck now, which didn't really work in the end. But I did work out if you snap really early before you play Bob, it's not going to move at all anyway. So you just snap early instead.
Yeah, and then you put your opponent in an awkward position where like the only way it can move is if they snap, and maybe they don't want to snap. And like I think the idea of a snap mechanic on a card is interesting. I just don't think the way they implemented it on Bob is particularly super interesting.
No, it's just boring. It's a boring card. I don't think it's very good. And I think they just baited a bunch of people through this, but it was nice that they tried to do the right thing. That would be. But
yeah,
a bit more to say about this one than it maybe deserves.
Well, speaking of boring cards, Sauron got an extra point of power too. So like the 3 people who still play Shuri Sauron are partying in the streets. It was actually funny reading their explanation for it and how they were talking about, well, the Shuri deck hasn't really gotten any tools recently, so we want to help them out. And it's like, yeah, I'm sure making Sauron a 3/4 is definitely helping them out a ton. I don't know about that one. Like, just kind of weird. Werewolf, kind of same thing. They were overly cautious on Werewolf and ended up not being good at all because the game has changed significantly since 3/3 Werewolf. And frankly, I'm surprised they didn't go right back to 3/3. I mean, 3/2 helps a little bit, but I think Wolf has the problem of when Wolf used to be good, there was way less stuff like clogging up the board, whether that be like White Widow or Debris or the newly buffed Viper. Like board space is a much bigger issue than it used to be.
Yeah.
And Werewolf has definitely suffered because of that. And then on top of that, we have way more like high power threats than I think we did when Wolf was dominating.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like I don't mind them making the change and trying to make it a little better, but this kind of applies to both Wolf and Hitmonkey. I don't think one more point of power was really the adjustment these cards needed if the goal is to like really make them feel a fair bit better. It feels mostly inconsequential, but you'll probably run into a game here or there where it's like, oh, I actually did appreciate the extra power, but for the most part, very minimalistic buffs. And then Ravonna on the other side of that, very minimalistic nerf. Ravonna just absolute powerhouse. She was the new Zabu. She is the new Zabu, essentially. And so it's funny seeing her get the Zabu stat line before he got changed again.
Right.
Those are, I think, the less impactful changes. And I mean, Blob was also less impactful. It was just for the Mystique interaction. They got rid of the ongoing, so you can't do that anymore. Lore fans are bringing out their torches because that is a big part of his lore, and they got rid of that, and people think that's kind of dumb. It also makes it worse for Cannonball or Cannonball.
Actually, I think they buffed Blob myself.
Yeah.
How where do you get that from? I'm interested.
The Cannonball, in particular, and also
the Cannonball anymore.
The opposing rogue. So I've been playing a lot. I've not been playing very much Arishem at all. Honestly, I've stopped playing it. I find it very We'll talk about that later. But I play a lot of rogue in like every deck imaginable. And there were times when you rogued even just to get the extra cards out of your deck, just to push it up. So
Get
even
stabbed,
if you
yeah.
weren't playing the Arishem mirror, having Rogue there was at least a way you could contest that lane.
Mhm.
And obviously in the Arishem mirror, now you just don't have Rogue. Now it's
Yeah,
just
I've seen
Shang-Chi and
more.
Ghost.
Yeah, more Arshims have been
The Shadow.
dropping Rogue with this change.
Yeah. Oh, I actually think that's the right decision now because Arishem Rogue was situational and
There's less
Enchantress is a
Darkhawk
better
too.
situational card.
A lot of the
Yeah.
Arsham decks aren't running Darkhawk for the mirror anymore. I think there's just less Darkhawk than there was than right after it came out. So makes
Yeah,
sense.
so there's
But
better cards you can pay for the stats. Like because
exactly.
Rogue's value was the tech, but also the ability to steal the mirrors.
Yeah, it was very relevant in the mirror with
Yeah.
blobs. It was super duper relevant. So yeah, I agree with that. I think this was
Yeah.
A relevant like nerf, but like it doesn't really like change too much else around the card.
No.
Like it's just they're still gonna play blob. Bob's still gonna be big. Yeah. But the other changes were kind of interesting. The Mockingbird one, I have to say, more impactful than I thought it would be. Like I knew it would be impactful. I've been surprised at how much the extra cost has actually like made a difference sometimes. And one of the probably the biggest place I've noticed it is in Arishem, where a lot of times you would play one random generated card on turn 1 or turn 2, and then on turn 3 you would play a 4/9 Mockingbird if you had it. Because you aren't doing a whole lot on your early turns as Arishem. You're usually playing random cards or like Coulson, stuff like that, or Loki. But without those, Arishem really isn't doing a whole ton of like 3 cost cards, 4 cost cards. So Bird not being able to be played on turn 4 as easy or turn 3 as easily, I think has been kind of relevant. And then the other thing is it is obviously now shangable, which that is obviously a downside for it because you can't just slam a bird and expect it to carry a lane for you.
Yep.
On the shangable thing, I have the opposite take. I think they buffed this in most decks. Arishem, I agree. Like it was actually worse in Arishem.
Yeah.
But I was going to say
very
that
good
I feel like this whole experiment of pushing it to 10 actually shows how little being in Shang range really impacts a card for myself. Like the decks I'm seeing it in, it's better. It's winning more lanes now because 10 power. So I'm seeing in the Sasquatch Mockingbird deck a lot. And that deck seems stronger now. It's got more power. Like it's just got more stats than it had before.
Yeah, and now it has Scar Synergy too. That is also a pretty relevant point, right?
Yeah, I've seen the Scar Synergy too. Like as long as they were trying to play the Mysterio or the Squirrel Girl or something to purposely reduce the card, the card's been improved. Arishem played it because you could play. You said that you could play it on turn 4 free, and in them cases, having a 9 power card didn't actually matter. It's no longer a Shang target. Like it wasn't a Shang target at 9. Stuff like that does make sense there. But in every other circumstance, pushing it to 10 just made it a better card for me. I actually think they stealth and buffed this card, and we're going to see more of it as time goes on.
Yeah, it's still, and they even said that in the patch notes, like they don't expect it to be going anywhere and expect it to still be powerful, and I think that's generally true.
Yep.
Yeah, it's I'm also a few one of them few cards which I don't necessarily like playing as much as other cards. So it doesn't fit my play style a lot of the time.
Interesting. I liked it a lot, but it's mainly because I like the cards that it wants me to play. Like I've always been a big Mysterio Squirrel Girl fan, so I like that it makes those cards better because those cards were kind of not too great for a while.
Yeah, I just feel like it's a good proving point. People always make the Shang is now Shangable argument, and I've always kind of scoffed at it and kind of made a joke out of it. And the fact that Mockingbird, like in a lot of cases, I think is a better card like this. And if Arishem was gone, I think this would have been a straight buff. Kind of proves it to me a little bit. Like I feel like it's not being talked about enough how little the Shang interaction actually matters in gameplay, because that's what my experience has been getting beaten by the 1 power a lot more by Mockingbird.
Interesting. Yeah.
So there are 2 other cards that were also pretty interesting changes. Viper. This is one where this is obviously a buff. I have been very surprised how good this buff feels. Like I think this is the strongest buff of the patch by a significant margin.
Oh, 100% agree.
Yeah, and I really like the deck you
100%
cooked up with it, Safety. I've been playing a lot of it, and it is just the clog with Ajax, and Viper is a huge part of what makes the deck work. Like, it's such a huge benefit now that you can play Viper in a lane with multiple cards, and you know exactly what you're always going to be sending over. Like, it was like a pretty good addition to general clog style decks.
Yes, I totally agree. Yeah, I've been playing that same deck, and it works really well. In fact, I think it feels like Clog is one of the good kind of matchups against Arishem, because they want to end up flooding the board, and when you can win lanes pretty easy when you're giving them a bunch of junk. It's pretty good.
Agreed.
Yeah, so the Viper immediately stood out to me, because the reason you couldn't play Viper before, I tried it a lot of times, was the fact that you had to you almost had to telegraph your play a lot. So you play a hood turn 1 or turn 2, and you had to leave it empty, or you were risking something. And then you would find yourself in awkward situations all the time where you had two options of what card we're going to send over. So you end up dropping Viper, and you end up going with only Sentry and Nihilist decks. Because what they did was they took away the ability to build the same style of deck with different ways, because when they changed Viper the first time, because you were stuck with stuff on your side of the board, so you couldn't do it. You just couldn't do anything else. You had to play Sentry and Nihilist. You had to play it that way. And I don't know. I'm worried this change is actually too good a little bit.
Don't tell them.
I like the fact that it gives you the ability to play the same cards a bit differently. This is a sort of buff which I think was a really good decision. But I do think, like Nate said, it's really good into Arishem in particular, because what they do, the Arishem player, especially the ones who don't play it non-stop and understand that could be better, they start just throwing their random cheap cards what they got down. So turn 1 they might play a 2/3, turn 2 they might play a random 3-drop, and then they're just kind of they're not really thinking strategy on what they're doing. So if you clog one of them lanes early, then you play amazingly Ajax on 5, and you can hazmat at the end. You can just flip both lanes in 2 with 3 cards. It's crazy. There's a real package there, but it's enabled by the fact that you can target with Viper. If you couldn't target with Viper, you can't play aggressively enough to keep up.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
If that makes sense. You can't drop cards quick enough.
Making it successful, and it's cool because I made no secret about thinking that Ajax was going to be one of the worst cards releasing in a long time. I've been very pleasantly surprised by how not only viable, but dare I say even strong it's been. I'm constantly getting over 20 power Ajaxes, and then it's also cool because it's made Hazmat have some relevancy, and that's a card that outside of the Luke Cage Surfer combo deck really hasn't seen play in a long time, and so it's kind of neat to see it revitalize a card that's really not often had much of a home.
Yeah, honestly, the Viper change is a bigger help to Ajax than people might let on, because it does gives you that package beforehand to actually get where you need to, because Annihilus and Ajax obviously clash with each other on 5, so it was very awkward to play the deck before that buff. So I don't want people to think Ajax was always good. I think it actually is a proof of how small changes in metagames and small supporting card changes actually can significantly change the viability of a card. Because otherwise there was no reason to play Ajax over Annihilus Sentry. Before this, I think that's my personal opinion.
It made it so I like that there is more variety to this Clog archetype now, because before it was just the Magic Dr. Octopus, and that deck also is doing quite well, and some are even experimenting with Ajax Viper versions of that deck. But it's cool that another version of that strategy can exist that doesn't necessarily rely on so many of the same cards we saw from that deck, like Dr. Octopus, Red Hulk, Magic, that kind of stuff. It's nice to be able to play that in a different way.
100%. This was a good change. This was a really adding variety, actually changing what you could do with cards. Very rarely do I think a change that they make is really that cool.
I agreed. I think this is one of the better ones they've done in a while, and I think we can very quickly contrast that with the Lockjaw change, which I'll let you have your moment with this, but I will say, I, as someone who is relatively neutral towards Lockjaw, they did kill it. 4/5 Lockjaw was absolutely terrible.
That's true.
and 4/4 Lockjaw that is no longer limited to once per turn, I think it's obviously better. I don't think it is enough to bring it back to like the oppressiveness of old Lockjaw, being
That's
3
also fair.
mana, like a big difference there. But I really like that specifically it feels better in the Thanos deck because Thanos has been struggling for a while. He's still not that great, but playing some Lockjaw Thanos with it's nice to see that deck feel like you're not completely throwing the game by attempting to play it anymore. It's not amazing or anything. Like I'd say you'd be generous to call it like a tier 3 deck or something. But I do think there is like a certain segment of the player base that really likes that kind of deck and play style, and I think it's good for them to be able to enjoy that a bit more. Also, I've seen a lot of people trying out the Jane Jaw stuff again. I've always liked that deck too. It's also, I think, in the same boat where I don't think it's super competitive with a lot of the better decks in the metagame, but it's nice to see those players throwing a bone because that deck hasn't been good in a while.
Can I give my unbiased take or my biased take first? Because I agree with a lot of what you just said. Overall, I don't think the card's actually that good still now, so that's one positive. But I do think that eventually it will be again, and that's kind of my issue here. Is that this card has always been my least favorite card in Marvel Snap. Doesn't matter what energy cost it's at. It could be a 7 cost card. I'd still hate it. It's people like it, I've been saying it for a very, very, very long time, and I think eventually it started to get through to some. Like it's not as random as people think it is. It's actually just like the biggest energy cheat card you can play in a generic deck, and why Thanos Lockjaw worked so well for so long.
Yeah.
But like you said, with the change, it's not as good because of the at 4 energy is much harder for a card like this to be successful at 4. And it does support a deck which is not doing as well right now into a meta which is pretty bad for it. So there are positives. I do play every card. I have played the Jane Jaw deck. I did think the same as you. I thought it was trash tier at the moment. I don't think that went very well, but the Thanos one worked surprisingly well again. It felt like a low tier deck but you could actually play.
Yeah, it felt like it was doing things when you were like Lockjaw and throwing some stones down where it did not after the first nerf.
Yeah, and I was playing it with Fastos and Black Swan, which is my current pet pairing at the moment, and I was having surprising success. I actually, did pretty well. Did one of my Snap Judgments Leagues matches with it, and it actually doesn't overpower that deck. But the problem is one day it will, and we'll be stuck with this effect again, and
that's
not
fair.
a fan.
I can understand.
I don't feel like this effect should be in a game with 12 cards myself personally.
But we have
maybe a game with 24 cards.
Yeah. Well, I think that sums up the OTA. I think that covers most of it. Fun little.
I think Blue is happy that Lockjaw and Hitmonkey are back, or at least a couple of his favorite cards. So.
Yeah, I mean, I love Hitmonkey. It's still kind of hard for him, but like I've seen people having success with like bounce stuff. I don't know how in a world where Leech is everywhere, but
the Leech has been the problem for it. I was playing before the Leech started showing up in all the Arishem decks. I was playing basically only bounce decks.
Yeah, I heard they were going well for people.
Yeah,
the Hitmonkey one was doing really well with the card that everyone would joke on stream at me at the Black Swan. Like, why are you playing Black Swan?
I've seen a bunch of people playing
Black Swan. I was first. Okay, I just want to go out there. I was doing Black Swan first. I have the tickets. The Black Swan with the Hitmonkey and the Rocket Raccoon and stuff was actually working really well, but now that they lead you on 4, it's all a little bit sad. And maybe we can move on. But Hitmonkey has a chance of one day being back, I think, with this change, if they keep it like this. I do think it has a chance.
Here's hoping. Well, let's talk Arishem. So, Arishem joined the game, most anticipated release in a long time, and unsurprisingly, it led to it being the most played card we have ever seen in the history of this game. I believe on release it was roughly 70% of games, at least according to the trackers we have access to, which is absurd. I think even High Evo in its heyday was not that high. And for good reason. This provides a unique way of playing the game, right? And a lot of people were down on this card pre-release. I would consider myself one of those people. I wasn't especially vocal about it, but I did have opinions that I really thought. I think a lot of people also thought this, that the extra 12 cards in deck would be a significant downside. You're thinking of when you end up normally getting random cards in Marvel Snap, they're not usually super good. But it turns out one of the reason random cards aren't usually super good is because you have a regular amount of energy. And when you have one more than that, essentially 6 more energy than your opponent throughout the course of the game, suddenly playing those random cards one turn ahead of when they're supposed to be played is really, really good. Because, and I think this also has to do with the fact that they've buffed so many bad cards over time. In general, the card quality really isn't that bad with a lot of these random cards. Maybe it would be if you were playing them on curve normally, but when you can play them a turn earlier, it's not bad.
No, in fact, it's almost like if you're weighing what's better, a bunch of random garbage or the extra mana each turn, like the extra mana outweighs it by so much, or the extra energy rather. And so it's like, all right, I almost feel like you could put Arishem in just about anything and like, all right, you're going to wade through a bunch of crap that you don't want. But like having the extra energy each turn has just been crazy. And there's so many ways that you can build this deck. It's almost absurd.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. It is very much dominating the game. It's come down, but it's still hugely, hugely popular. And the other thing is like that I think most people, including myself, underestimate about this card, how often you actually see the cards you put in your deck. You would think with doubling your deck size, you would see the cards you put in your deck significantly less often. And in general, that really hasn't been the case. I mean, think about your Arishem games and how often you are seeing that turn 5 or turn 6 Blob, or Shang-Chi, or turn 3 Coulson, turn 2 Coulson. Like it happens very frequently. And I think that is something a lot of people just did not anticipate about the card.
Yeah, it's really good. I don't know. I can't like I can't really picture playing a whole lot else right now because, well, and you know what's messed me up now is I'm like, all right, cool. It's turn 1. I have 2 energy. It's turn 2. I can
when you go back to play a regular deck and it totally just messes you up. Yeah,
it has. I've been playing that Viper.
The Arishem energy withdrawals.
I've been playing that Viper like junk deck and it's fun, but then I find myself like, why can't I play that? It messes up my turns. So used to so here's what happened. Like I rushed to try to get it last month and I got it. Like I spent, like we went to a cruise in Alaska and we were either out in the ocean or in Canada where I just didn't have coverage and ended up hitting Infinite on like the last day of the month because I waited so long. But like I didn't get the card initially on release. And then all I was facing was Arishem decks and I was just getting stomped because you can't play around them because it's just a bunch of random junk, but then they've got all the extra energy so they can play a 6-drop on turn 5 and another one on turn 6. And it's like, what, how do you deal with this? I mean, there's
Leech and Dr. Octopus on turn 4.
Yeah,
it's been a problem.
I was like, and I had to scramble to like try to get the card. And then I used the card to hit Infinite. And it worked, but geez, what a crazy experience. This card is pretty gnarly. People are calling for it to be tuned down, right? Which I don't think they're going to do. So
that's the thing. It's just strong. That's the thing that people keep skirting around. We do this all the time in the Snap when people discuss stuff in Snap. They point to other cards. Oh no, it's the Loki. Oh no, it's the Dr. Octopus, etc., etc. The card is just strong. It's been strong since release. The reason people are playing it is because it's strong. They're not playing it because it's fun. They're not playing it because it's giving them RNG. They're not playing it for any other reason. They're playing it because they're winning more games. Or at least they feel like they're winning more games. And the only reason it's got anything near normal stats is that there's so many times it's facing itself that it beats itself. That's the actual problem. It beats its own counters. I've stopped playing Arishem a lot, so I can tell you that you feel like you're playing with a handicap playing another deck.
Yeah, if you're playing with a
crazy.
12-card deck right now, it feels like you're playing at disadvantage a lot of the time.
I feel like I'm playing against boss mode or hard mode in a solo game. Like, it honestly feels like that. Like I'm playing the hard mode against a solo card game. It's like Hearthstone solo adventures, like the final rounds, like sort of thing. It's just actually, you don't know. Yeah, it's not that. That's the problem. That's the thing. People don't talk about it. They didn't do it. They did it with Galactus. We did it when we talked about Loki, where we all said it was something else. We wait for the counters. I'd like to skip that part and just start talking about the fact that it's strong and what to actually do about it. But, we gotta wait.
I feel that. I feel that. I think even if the community properly acknowledged it, I think we would still have to wait. And I think we can bring up the tweets I sent earlier, because I think that's a big part of the conversation around that stuff. I think it's an interesting topic to discuss, because I feel like by being players who are very engaged with the game, and especially at like the higher level of the game, are what we value, I think, is very different than what they value from their perspective. And I think I don't think either side is necessarily wrong in their evaluations there, but it's just like a really big difference of perspective. So this is from KM's hot takes thread. And Gnome, another content creator for Snap, said Second Dinner doesn't want to balance the game around top infinite because they're not focused on making a competitive game. And yeah, that's generally pretty agreed upon. Fine. But what ends up happening is top players figure out how to break the game first. Then what is broken at the top eventually becomes meta and broken elsewhere. Balance around top infinite meta, please. And yeah, I think that's generally very true. And it's true in a lot of other card games where the people at the very top will kind of put in the time, put in the testing, and find the things that are really busted. And then that gradually trickles down to the rest of the player base over time, sometimes faster than other times. But this got a response from Glenn, who said, because I wandered by, you're right that strength spreads, but wrong that it's an inefficiency. It's deliberate. Balancing to the top 1% means the 99% experiencing metagames rising and falling for themselves. Balance isn't the fun, it's a tool for shaping it. And I think that's pretty... If I have to give Second Dinner it's one thing, it's that they are generally pretty consistent. And this is something you've talked about a bunch on the show, that their number one priority in the game really is shaking up the game to try and keep it interesting for people. And I think people like us who are towards the top more, we generally play a lot more than the average person does. So not only is the better thing found quicker, but it also gets more frustrating because you see it so much more and you experience so much more of it than the average person does. And so I completely understand the perspective they have, where it's like, if you're someone who is playing Snap for 5 or 10 minutes a day, you're probably still having a ball with Arishem, or a lot of people probably are, because you haven't played against it for hours and hours and dealt with some of the frustration that comes with that. And so it's like, I think what he's saying is pretty valid, but I also think it doesn't it doesn't mean the people are wrong for feeling what they feel about the experience towards the higher end. I think those feelings are still very valid. I just don't expect them to change the game around that, because there's no incentive for them to. There's no good reason. And if anything, there's an incentive to do otherwise because it impacts more of their players. So that is the thing that's going to have the larger impact on the general player base of the game. I just thought it was a very interesting conversation and response.
See, I agree with that, with what you say there, Zombies, like almost entirely. But I have a caveat, which I'll go into in a second.
Okay.
Like I get that what he's saying. Like, he wants to let people experience a change in metagame and all that stuff. But what I find is there's certain circumstances, I think, in my opinion, where something is so polarized or frustrating, but like this situation here, where when that trickles down, the average player, when they get annoyed at it, are going to have a much more outsized reaction than some of the people like Gnome, like Spyro,
Yes.
like all the people I've seen commenting on it, whose comments and takes I actually agree with, but they'll keep playing. Like
Yeah.
the issue is when this gets down, when it trickles down, everyone is playing Doctor Octopus Leech, and you
Which
get
we're rapidly
on
getting
turn
towards
4.
right now.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that
trickled
doesn't
down
take
pretty
very
fast.
long. Exactly, it doesn't take very long to happen. And honestly, like they probably should have tested that. Like that's another one of them. They probably should have tested that one.
Yeah,
Which has happened a few times. When
it's a
that
lot
gets
like
down
Loki,
to everyone,
right? Like original
exactly.
Loki, where it came out, it was clearly busted. I actually posted a tweet where you could replace their patch, their first OTA notes for the Loki season with what they
I
did
saw
now,
that.
where they were like, look, he's really popular,
Rogue
actually the most
Mhm.
popular card ever, but he's not a super big outlier according to our statistics right now. They didn't say it in that patch, but they had Mobius coming up shortly after, who acted as a counter, and now they're saying that with Cassandra Nova. It feels like a similar situation where it's like, and I think that in general they are okay with cards like this being really strong and probably a bit too strong at times, as long as that changes the environment from what it was before, because then when they want to change it again, they can be like, all right, it's time to nerf this, which is what they did with Loki.
Yeah,
It
but
took them a while, but they did it, and that's probably what's going to happen with Arishem.
yeah. So that's what I mean. Like, I get the philosophy, but a really big but would be I think this sort of whiplash doesn't actually create the environment they think it does for a lot of players, where they get invested in these things and they're going to just be frustrated by it when they start having to play it all the time. They have no way to counter it. And
Yeah.
when their win rates all plateau down to like 50-something% like everybody else, like at the top where people are all playing mirrors, they'll just get frustrated and leave. Or they'll play less and they'll stop spending money. When I was not enjoying it during the Thanos heyday, I was playing less. I played a lot of Marvel Duel. I stopped playing as much and I spent less money and I didn't come. I
did that in the
create
Loki
content.
season.
So I came back because I create content and there is incentives for me to play which are not there for everybody else, and I get that I will get more frustrated quicker with a card like you said, but there are times I think like this, like potentially original Loki, the Thanos Blob, where leaving it just for the sake of novelty is actually damaging, because when that gets to everybody, the reaction isn't going to be, oh great, I had a nice novel experience for 2 weeks. It'll be more outblown than what the content creators actually do, which is
I got leashed for 2 weeks and I stopped playing the game.
Yeah, and I'm not going to play this game anymore. Like I've seen tweets where people are like, this is encouraging leech, I'm not coming back, like sort of things. And but I've also seen people tweet. I've seen people tweet that, oh, I don't know what the best list is. I'm like, well, then you're obviously not tuned in at all, because it's quite obvious right now what the best list is.
Throw an Arishem and press autocomplete, and it'll probably give it to you.
It's pretty darn close.
Yeah, because they're all, and this is the thing that really annoyed me about what they said in the patch notes, how they're like, oh, we're hoping this patch leads to more diversity among the Arishem decks.
It didn't. It did the opposite.
It did not do that at all. If anything, it made them all more the same. The Arishem decks barely changed at all after the change, other than some of the people who were playing like Darkhawk Mystique dropped that, but people were already doing that before the patch. Like that was already on its way out.
Yeah, it was already on its way out because the mirrors were frustrating. That's you were trying to beat the mirror. But taking away the Mystique interaction forced you not to be able to do that anymore. So what's the next best thing? And it's exactly, there was a day, I think I went into one of Size's first streams and he was playing Arishem, and someone kept asking him why you're not playing Darkhawk. And he's like, because I'm future-proofing it. And he was playing basically almost the exact list that everyone's made, like all the top ones have been the last couple of weeks. Because and he was already doing it, like at the start. Like it wasn't, those players who worked it out straight away. And you take away options by nerfing the most powerful thing. It just ends up with the next one, and then everyone does the same thing. Like I don't know.
Yeah, you
I think
play
it took away diversity,
right?
Yeah,
it's like when they hit Collector to try and balance Loki, and then eventually they still had to hit Loki anyway.
Because what you did was you made that. You actually took away something that was actually, in a weird way, because of the strength of it, was allowing people to play different cards. How do I explain this better so I don't sound like an absolute fool? So because you could do Blob Mystique, you were able to do Blob Mystique and then Darkhawk and then you could actually just put whatever the frick you wanted else in there. But actually was probably adding variety, which they took away by nerfing it.
Yeah, I mean,
making
I'd
it
agree
the
with that.
one most powerful thing to do is Doc Ock Leech. So everyone goes to that. Like you actually
Doc Ock Leech, the card generation in Loki,
remember
the lists are homogenized, like super homogenized.
Yeah, remember the Loki, that when Loki, people would unironically be playing like Loki Surfer. And the reason you could get away with that is because you could do the Loki collector thing and just win some games. And you might be like, I'm getting beat by Loki all the time, which is true. But the alternative was, and we found out pretty quickly, we all just get beaten by the same Loki deck, which has Angela and Mobius.
Which is even less fun, right?
And that's exactly the same deck, not even changing. Maybe there's a surprise Shadow King in there.
Yeah, no, I think that's very applicable.
That's what's happened too.
Comparing that time to this time, I think I really, it's very rare for me to see diversity in Arishem decks. It's cool when it happens. I ran into someone today who was hard running Mabaku and Living Tribunal. That was funny. It didn't work out very well for them, but it was funny.
Well,
Mabaku did win them the game, but it's not, you're not going to see a lot of that. Like you're going to see more of the people copying what the general best thing to do with it is. And that's why +1 energy is really busted, because that's what happens. People are going to naturally gravitate towards the best thing. And there's really not much incentive in Arishem to not try and do the best thing. Like,
no. In fact, you actually incentivize to do the best thing. That's the problem with Arishem. Because the extra cards are there, you're incentivized to make sure every single one of the 12 cards to be the best card for you to be playing for your strategy. So you that's why it was optimized so quickly, I think, as well, because it was like that's what makes sense. Like you want every card that you draw from your deck to be impactful. So you play, you whittle it down very quickly. Anything that's not pulling its weight, you figure out very quickly, because you draw it and you're like, I may as well have drawn any random card. And you're often just ahead the entire game, because you're playing ahead of curve. And I think I made this point with Loki's release, and I made the point again when Arishem came out. Every card in Marvel Snap, they don't develop cards in Marvel Snap to do much, really. They're developed to put power on board. So if you're getting random cards in Snap, it's actually not as bad as other card games. People keep making this mistake. Like the random cards are all developed to put power into one of 3 lanes. It's a very simple game, and playing them ahead with extra energy is always going to be a strong thing. It's not like it was never going to be weak, because it was just you got extra energy, and your downside is you got 12 cards which are designed to win 2 lanes in your deck. You'll draw and get to play early. Like your downside's not a downside.
Extra winning, right? That I do think a lot of people do miss that it is and always has been a game about points. And 6 extra energy throughout the course of the game makes it easier for you to be winning on points. That's just
exactly
what it is.
Like the people think that they're being this is something like I'll go through my frustrations with what I read about it, because the same as Loki days, really. People think they're being smart and they're working out novel ways to win and stuff, but really what's happening is you're just playing with an unfair advantage over your opponent. You didn't actually do anything extra special. You just were able to play that random claw on turn 4, so then you were able to still play your finisher on turns 5 and 6. Like you weren't people are selling it like I'm having fun using my smarts and wits to come up with strategies, but really you're just playing random big card you drew and playing it on the board. Outside of the first day, it started to feel very stale very quickly, Arishem, because of that. It's actually not a very varied experience.
No, not at all. It feels like I'm playing against a 12-card deck, but it's not, right? Like sometimes you'll get got by the random. It feels like you get got by the random cards more than the times where the random cards are actively bad. And there's a little bias there, because you won't see it always, right? Like it's like the Iceman effect, like because if they have a bad card, you might not see them play it. So sure, but I think even with that in mind, just because of how powerful the random or how powerful the energy is, like it's not that big.
The energy overjudges the bad card a lot of the time, though. So if on turn 2 you draw, I don't know, what's the random free drop right now? Right, free Cyclops. Playing Cyclops on turn 2 is a good play.
Yeah,
it's a 4 power card on turn 2. It's you just played it. It's 4 power. You don't have to do anything else with it. It's there. Turn 2. Playing Shocker on turn 1 is not a bad card to play. You're ahead then. You're ahead. You play the card. I don't see how people like. So I have a bit of an issue with how people frame it, and it was the same thing you just see last like Loki. Is like you don't see when they got the bad hand. It's like yeah, that's true, but most of like the reason most of the time it doesn't end up in a bad hand is that if you count through all the cards in Marvel Snap, most of them add power to the board or have an effect which is ridiculous in some way, and you're just getting 12 random ones of that. Like it's just there isn't the downside is never was not a downside.
And it'll only get better, right? Yeah. As they add more new good cards to the game, in theory.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you said before, Hydra Bob. When you get Hydra Bob off a draw randomly in Arishem, like, oh, cool, 1-5.
Yeah, I can just weave that into my most of my turns or the final turn with a 6-drop. It's
and the build post Cassandra Nova is like almost quite obvious. Like you suddenly get now you're going to have a non-reveal you can play on turn 2. Which is crazy strong, which can be followed up with an on-reveal on turn 4 called Absorbing Man, which does it again.
Turn 3 in Arishem.
and then exactly, turn 3, sorry, that's what I meant, turn 3. Then turn 4, you can leech them so they can't do it back.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's literally going to recreate what we saw in the first few days of Arishem, where it was all just mirror attack running the Darkhawk Mystique stuff. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Yeah. Where you're going to have people running the dedicated decks that are 12-card decks to run that and get it more consistently, but you're also just going to have the Arishem decks running it to tech for the mirror. And worst case, even if you aren't hitting the mirror, playing Cassandra Nova on turn 2 is really good still. It's exactly. A very large body.
No, yeah, you get a stronger Cassandra Nova than your opponent's one. So if you're playing against, this is the thing, this is what people are forgetting about Nova, and I think they've missed it too. If you play it on 2, it's a 3-8. And your opponent, who's now going to draw 5 cards, which are weaker. So even if they are a counter deck, you've actually made it harder for them to beat you. And that's what keeps it like... I just want to be clear. I'm not complaining at the moment. I'm trying to explain why this is an issue to people. So I don't... Because I've given up on complaining about this game in a lot of ways, because this is reality of Marvel Snap.
Yeah, I understand
I think it helps. Yeah, I think it helps to try and actually objectively look at what's going on with cards. Mm-hmm. And I just... boggles me that my immediate reaction to Cassandra Nova is it's going to be good in Arishem, and their reaction is it's going to counter Arishem. I just feel like they haven't played enough of the counter decks themselves or something. It continues to boggle me how my opinion could be so different to this. And
I think part of it's a lack of testing. I mean, I'm sure they do.
Yeah, exactly.
But I feel like they've also, like from other stuff we've seen in the past, I think the testing isn't
resources are put elsewhere as well.
And so, but again, I think that roots back to like they're okay with things being imbalanced at times or being, maybe less balanced than they expect, as long as it's like changing the experience so people don't get bored, which I'm sure that works for some people and it doesn't work as well for other people.
The thing is that I just going back to that point one last time, I agree. I feel like it works really well when it's small changes which actually make small changes. Like Viper was a good change. That would have made a small change to the meta. You see a new deck for a little bit, you maybe work out how to play against this new deck. Most of their releases lately have actually been like that, where there's a new deck for a little bit and it works kind of, but you always go back to the main. This one, when you make a big change like this, like Arishem, like you end up actually making the meta less diverse, because everyone gets it, the release doesn't work, but also when it's clearly the strongest deck, everyone's just going to play the strongest deck. Marvel Snap's not diverse enough to handle a card like this. Same thing happened with High Evo's release. Same thing happened with Loki's release. It cannot handle stuff like this. The game can't handle it.
Yeah, I'd agree.
The game's not set up in a way that it works for this. They need to... I think that hopefully they're learning from these things, so they do it another time.
It's very rare. Like, I also think it's one of those things where cards that single-handedly create an archetype are super rare in this game, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
We're talking about Loki and Evo, and those are 2 of the only cards in the last 2 years that have actually done that, right? And then this card did that too. And those things, I think having cards like that is really, really good for the game. And I think this is one of the reasons why Arishem is so adamantly defended when people are talking about hey, it's too strong. Yeah. I do think Arishem is probably the best card they've ever released in terms of a card that is almost tailor-made for people who are either new or returning players.
Yes.
Because Arishem solves some of the very painful collection issues many players have, whether that's a new player or someone who stopped playing and came back. Because I talked pretty extensively with Wizard Beast the other night. OGs from the Mercenaries times might remember him from the Fighting Pit podcast.
Yep.
He stopped playing Snap last year around the Nebula season. So like last summer, just before last summer, he came back recently. He got Arishem. I recommended him to get Arishem. He had 2 keys. He opened, he missed it, and he used the third one and he got it. And he played a ton of the game and got Infinite for the first time and has been having a lot of fun with it.
Wow.
And talking to him about that experience was really interesting because like you get to play with all these cards that you do not have access to and you have no idea when you're going to have access to them. Arishem is also a deck that even if you're missing a lot of the powerful staples for like the ones people are often playing now, like with Loki and Blob and stuff, you can still do really, really well with an incredibly budget Arishem deck. Just because of how powerful that extra energy is. And there are a lot of cards in Pool 1, Pool 2, and Pool 3 that are just super duper strong when you have that extra energy to leverage. So like in that respect, I think it's probably one of the best cards they've ever made in terms of like being a positive thing for players. It's just that they are going to have to find a way to strike a better balance with it than they are currently, because it's not long-term sustainable in the current form.
Yes, like you're right. Like it's like you buy an archetype. It's like High Evo when it released, even though like they overpowered that one too. To be fair, that was
it was super overpowered when High Evo came out.
But the point was like you didn't need to.
You need other cards, right? All the cards except for like She-Hulk and Wasp were basic cards.
Well, you didn't even need She-Hulk or Wasp if you wanted.
Yeah, you can still play it without it, right? Yeah.
And we do this a lot in Snap because there's only 12 cards. People think that's the reason, but it's really because there's usually quite often reduces down to being quite clear what the obvious best answer is in the decks. So a lot of the people who comment on this game and a lot of the content creation comes from people who have to face that best one all the time. And that actually just then drives it further, right? Like it's not Loki, it's not Doc Ock, it's not Leech. You could literally play any other cards in there. You can play all sorts of versions of Arishem and you will find success because you've got the extra energy. But because I know you'll be in the same situation as me. I play that same deck over and over and over again. And they're not trying different things, not being creative or anything like that. You can blame all that stuff. It's not because of that. It's because that is actually just the best way to play it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that's the only way, but you can wish it all you want. No one's going to go to a weaker way to play it if they can play the stronger way. They're not going to do it. You can't blame them for it. So the card's too strong. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. Like it's important to acknowledge the pros of it, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that like it seems fair. Even in a hypothetical scenario where Cassandra Nova comes out and it does put a dent in it, I still think that doesn't create a super fun gameplay experience. It just creates a polarized and I think pretty unfun experience. Like I played a Darkhawk deck and was beating up on some of them during the first week. I was like, all right, cool. Winning's fun, but if I'm not in the particular mood of wanting to play Darkhawk, like it's just like having an I win button. And it's like, did I draw it? Did I do the thing? Okay, I win. Did I not? Okay, I lose. And it's just like I'm like flipping coins at that point. It removes a lot of the gameplay about Snap that is actually like interesting and compelling.
Yes, I actually had the same experience. It wasn't like I was like, I can play Darkhawk, I can have a better chance of beating this. But no, I got bored very quickly. I don't necessarily think that the average Darkhawk gameplay is very interesting or interactive to me. Like it's a lot of it's just when to play Darkhawk and whether you play it last turn or turn 5. Like it was really the only decision you make a lot of the time. And that was my concern. It wasn't that Arishem was unbeatable. It was that you could do that. And then Arishem players got better. And you do them saying you play them Darkhawk decks now, and suddenly you're losing half the time because they've gotten better.
You are.
And it's like, well, now I can't counter them. Now, Cassandra Nova might help. I think Darkhawk being a 5 cost does limit the way you can build a deck to play against it. For example, the bounce decks, I would much rather be playing Cassandra Nova as my potential I win button than
Yeah,
Dark Orc.
because it doesn't.
Because I've meant to make, I've made all these janky Dark Orc bounce decks, and I would rather be playing the card which I can potentially replay and duplicate and do things with. And there's a lot of even like the Fina decks. I could imagine Fina deck lists which would prefer to drop the Dark Orc and play a Gwenpool and a Cassandra Nova or something instead. Like there's just there's lots of different. Like I think she opens up the ways you can do it, but it's still reduced down to the same thing, which is, am I playing the 2 counter cards, or am I playing Arishem with the 2 counter cards?
Yeah, it really feels like it is super narrow to the metagame, which is a shame because, relatively speaking, I mean, I think ever since the initial nerf that brought Thanos out of being like a tier 0 deck, I think we've had some pretty decent metas. I mean, you can definitely argue the fact that for like a little bit before Arishem, it did feel like things were being dominated by like Mockingbird decks. Those were making up like the majority of the really strong decks. But in general, you were still seeing other stuff see play and see success. And I feel like in a post-Arishem world, I am seeing just way less of that because those decks that were tier 2, tier 3 feel like they got knocked down even harder because they cannot compete with the raw output of what these Arishem decks do.
The problem is that them decks are losing by 5% to Arishem. That's the problem. You can't like even cope into playing them.
The matchup spread is disgusting. We looked at it on Untapped the other day. The only decks we were seeing that had above 50% versus Arishem were the things running Darkhawk. There were like 2 or 3 decks running Darkhawk. And even then, the Darkhawk decks were like 55% maybe. 45, 55. So the Arishem deck's still beating them a lot. It's not like people call it a hard counter, like you're winning 70-30.
Not a hard counter.
You're not.
No.
You're not.
It's not a hard counter. You're playing a fair game against them still. That's just the problem. But I think the issue, like you touched on, is that not that it can be beaten by another deck. Like it can. You can play Dark Orc, and you could go hunting for them. I did that the other night, and I climbed pretty well for a little bit. And then you have a run where it all goes wrong and it goes wrong, but that's fine. Put that to one side. It's that you can't play a Silver Surfer deck right now and really like I'd just laugh at anyone who told me to play Silver Surfer right now. Honestly,
it's really bad, especially with the Mockingbird nerf. That was one of the ones that got.
Yeah, that was one of the decks which is now weaker. Now that deck deserved a nerf before Arishem because it was like doing something stupid and you could hardly interact with it. But Arishem made it. You can't compete with Arishem. So now, does it not deserve a nerf, or does it? Because they nerfed it. The Mockingbird nerf actually hits that deck harder than any other deck.
For Surfer. Yeah,
and that's why it got nerfed. And they probably did that mainly because it was outperforming in that deck. But trying to tell me that Surfer is good right now is laughable. Like it's just not. Like, you can't play it into playing a deck full either against a deck full of counters trying to target Arishem, or Arishem which just plays ahead of you the entire game.
Like counter Fog has become a lot more popular because it's one of the few decks that feels like instead of having to leverage a counter card in Darkhawk, you try and counter them by they play out some random junk on the first turn or 2 turns, and then you clog them up and then win another lane with a Doc, a Shang, an Ajax. Take your pick.
Now, I understand the games. It's a card game. Things should go up and down, but they've gone down to like 45-40%. Like you can't. You look on Untapped and some of the win rates are just absurdly low. Like not of other decks. Like if you go through and you look at some of the other decks, which just the random decks of people used to enjoy playing to 50%, and they tell you how great they were. But you can't. There's some of them are really low now, and that's because they can't even try to keep up with extra energy.
Yeah, and it's too hard. I agree.
And I think it's going to become a very hot topic with the release of Deadpool's Diner this coming week, because
everyone's going to play it.
You have to remember, Cassandra Nova. Sure, it's not a card you're paying fees or tokens for, but you are paying with your time in the diner, having to win in the mode and unlock the card. And what do you think everyone's going to do when their goal is, hey, I need to win games in order to get this potential counter card? I think they're going to play the deck that is the best at winning games. And, well, that's Arishem.
That's another thing Marvel Snap goes through. I'm bad for this. I play the style of decks I want to play. more than I do the good deck, and that means I sometimes lose more and win more, and I don't really like. As long as I'm enjoying it, it's fine. But when push comes to shove, when everyone needs to win a game, they do go back to the deck.
Yeah.
And it happens in Infinity Conquest, happens a lot too, where you sort of like when you go in there and you've not seen that deck for months, and it'll be there because that's the deck that they know they can potentially steal games with. It happens a lot in Snap, and this is one of them periods of time right now in the middle of a season where people kind of stop playing as seriously all the time. And you do see people try some random stuff every now and again, and the fact that you're not seeing that is also an issue. But when it comes to we need to actually win games, people are going to go to this deck, and it's not going. I think that opinion might change very quickly when you try to play Deadpool's Diner and they're snapping turn 1. And it's the Quinjet comes down, and the snapping turn 2, and the Coulson comes down, and I don't think people will actually enjoy this experience as much as they think they will, and as much as Second Din I think they will.
I think they definitely are going to. It is going to be soured on quickly when the Diner comes, and also because the Diner, by its natural nature of auto doubling on turn 4, 5, and 6, decks where like definably you have a better chance to win. Decks that are often, only getting that 1 or 2 cubes or whatever because they don't stay because they know they lost. Those decks are better. Those decks are straight up better. Because if you have, and I think Clog is going to be really, really good because of this, oftentimes your Clog, like filling a lane, is happening on turn 4. Turn 4, maybe turn 5. So you will get at least 1 auto double, and then if you know that's going to happen and you snap before it does, you at least got 2 doubles. And that's huge. And that's assuming they only leave on turn 4. So I think decks like that, and I think Arishem is going to be one of those decks because you see, I have the nuts Arishem hand. I have Quinjet, and Coulson. I have Loki. I have my Blob. Like I have the good cards. I'm going to early snap, and I think it is, and I think people are going to become very skittish about it. Yeah, Coffee Cat. Who that's going to be an interesting one too. That card. Yeah. Although, funnily enough, Arishem is a little bit of a copycat nerf, right? Because their bottom card might be random trash.
Yes.
It'll still be good a lot of the time, though.
I hear your incredibly strong argument that Arishem nerfs copycat. I agree. I think that the Diner meta is more about snaps, and I've personally think that Marvel Snap is better when it's about the card game part of it. But that's me being different to a lot of people, I suppose, because a lot of the average player wants to talk about snap lines and how they can get the most snap equity, and I just want to talk about how I can actually win games. Deadpool's Diner does not encourage that. Deadpool's Diner encourages you to snap hard on people and take random chances, and the best deck at doing that is the one which gives you more energy to take them random chances, and a lot of people are going to want to do that when they want that card very badly, and then they're going to do all that to put the card potentially into the same deck. So I've been concerned for a little while. Storm, like I do think that people will find being snapped on all the time actually more exhausting than they think it will be.
Oh yeah,
I agree with that. I
don't
make it
snap.
stressful.
The days when you're in there's days when if I log in and I'm playing against, because we play against the same people all the time. So within about 10, 15, 20 minutes, I'll know which player I'm going to see a few times that night. And I'll know that I'm going to see, like if I see them at the start of a stream, for example, I know I'm probably going to play them 3 or 4 times. And if there's certain ones that people who snap early on me all the time, it's just more stressful. It's actually not as enjoyable as people think it is to snap all the time.
I completely agree with this. I find I really enjoy when I end up getting matched with, I think there's a good portion of players who just like watching the game play out more than they care about the snap equity. And so oftentimes we just have a bunch of 2-cube games. And it's like, people like staying in 2-cube games, even if they know they don't have a great chance of winning, because it's just fun to watch the game play out.
Yes.
I play out 2-cube games and lose all the time because I have a philosophy. I actually think it's better to stay in them and try and win it because you do win some of them. But if they snap on me and they're snapping early and stuff, and I'm just rolling my eyes, leaving immediately, and the rope snapping and all this stuff, it's actually mentally exhausting.
Yeah, it gets tiring.
It's not as fun. It's mentally exhausting, and when that, I think the average player doesn't actually get exposed to some of these strategies as often, and Deadpool's Diner is about to introduce them and teach them that.
Oh yeah, the snapping matters more than anything in this mode, and I think snapping on it as a concept is a part of what makes the game quite fun. But like you said, when it becomes the main thing, when snapping becomes the more prioritized thing than watching how the gameplay turns out, I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of players do not find that more fun.
Yeah, well, just to like my rank one, I don't know about your one, was built on weeks and weeks and weeks of actually playing, not staying in games and snapping early on people, retreating
being
early,
smarter
retreating
about
lots,
it and like really dedicating to it. Yeah,
and Deadpool's Diner is primed to teach people some things that they might not actually see about Marvel Snap right now, and that'll bleed over into other parts of the game too. But I just think that fundamentally, I hope I'm wrong, but the idea of the mode does not sit as fun to me. It seems to appeal to a different person altogether than I am, and we'll see.
Yeah, like
playing
if snaps are your favorite thing, that's probably the mode for you. But I don't think that's most people.
No, most people, whether they want to admit it or not, most card gamers, including myself, the favorite thing about a card game is winning the card game.
And the one cube retreats aren't as fun to win. It's like I won, but I don't feel as good about that as I do watching the final turn go off. And it's not even that I'm winning one more cube. It's just like I like to see why I won. I like to see the things that happened that resulted in the win, rather than just being like, oh, I'm in a super advantageous position, let me get my cube.
Yeah. And yeah, the taking, like, yeah, I do think there's going to be power in. I'll stop my soapboxing soon. I just want to be clear that I'm not complaining. I'm trying to help people understand things a bit better. But I do think Deadpool's Diner is going to encourage some playing with the snap system in a way that a lot of players don't do. And I think you're in a position like I am, Zombies, where you may have seen some of these things happen to you already. So we might be better off than some players will be. But I think I find it it's not a fun experience for me half the time to do that. I just want to play my random phone game.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to deal with rope snapping.
I feel similarly about that, where like the thing that keeps me coming back to the game is not necessarily the snap aspect of it. I think it's good to have because it helps mitigate some of like the RNG and whatnot that's very prevalent in the game. But the thing that brings me back to Marvel Snap is the gameplay. I like the gameplay.
Yeah,
and I think
me
that's
too.
most people.
Yep.
So it's weird doing
that's
a mode that's all about snapping.
It's a novel concept, Zombies. The gameplay might be the reason you play Marvel Snap.
Yeah, I genuinely think not enough people actually acknowledge that, and I think Second Dinner especially could look a little better into that. Like when you're hyping up when they were announcing the Deadpool's Diner, anyone else think it was weird they didn't show any gameplay? Like the reason people play your game instead of showing a freaking menu or UI like that I just don't understand how, and I'll save that for another time because I could go on a long tangent. But it does feel like that's lost a little bit sometimes in the sauce, where you're like, yeah, the gameplay, why people like the game so much. And speaking of the snap discussion, I'm going to drop my hot take that one of the worst cards in the game might finally have some time in the sun. Deadpool's Diner.
Which one? Which one?
Kang. Kang. Don't tell anyone. Shh, keep it a secret. But it turns out in a mode where people have to respect your snaps more, being able to bluff snap with Kang is actually incredibly powerful. And it gets even more powerful when Arishem is so popular and people feel like they have to respect Arishem snaps because you don't know what's going to happen. A lot of the time, you don't know why they're snapping, whether it's they got their good card or they got a good random generation. This card, actually, I am unironically going to be playing with this in an Arishem deck.
I can finally use it.
Yeah, everyone bought this and no one played it.
I actually agree, and I think I will too. Which is strange to say. I think turn four Kang right before it's about to double, and they have to respect it more because it's going to double twice. But here's the last kicker. Here's my hot take. most people don't actually even consider this, and they won't even respect it anyway, and they'll stay in and beat you anyway. So
I think that's fair, and that's one of the reasons why bluffing has traditionally been very bad in Marvel Snap, because more often than not, players end up calling your bluff. I think the rare exception to this is where, if you're in a position like we are, where we are playing top people a lot, they respect it a lot more than the rank 50,000 infinite player is going to respect it.
Yeah.
And since there is matchmaking MMR in the diner, I think if you are running into stronger players more often, Kang gets better. And if you're not, he gets worse. Like I've been trying this a little bit on ladder, and I am surprised at how often it works. And even against some people who know that I have Kang, because even if you know I have Kang, if you've seen my deck before and you've seen the Kang, you don't know that's the reason I'm snapping. I could be snapping on one of the 5 other really strong things that this deck is letting me do, instead of it just being a bluff with Kang. And it's also really funny because you can scare people who snap you, because they snap you, you immediately snap them back, and sometimes that scares people enough to leave.
That's true.
I will be trying it too. So,
So that's the hot take. Your spicy Deadpool's diner tech. Your results may vary. We do not take responsibility for any bubs lost.
Zombies takes responsibility for all cubes lost.
Oh my gosh. Well, we're at the top of the hour. I know SafetyBlade has got a time constraint, so this might be a good segue to start wrapping it up.
Yeah, I think we talked about a bunch of cool stuff. Before we go, I think one cool final question to end it on, since we spent so much time talking about Arishem and the fact that we believe it is an outlier. What would you like to see happen to Arishem in an effort to keep the card playable, but make it more in line with, the rest of the game?
Yeah, okay. I would add 6 cards.
Yeah, I think that's about all you can do. I mean, if they want to keep the same effect, you've got to add additional cards to make it less consistent. I don't really see anything else to do, because if you added the cards but didn't add the extra energy, no one would play it, right? It would be bad.
Yeah, if you get rid of the extra energy, the card's unplayable. Like Stone Cold, unplayable. I've seen a lot of different suggestions. I've seen some people who want it to start in hand. I've seen some people who say get rid of the extra energy, but all the random cards get a reduction. I've seen a lot of different suggestions, but I'm in agreement with you guys where the change I would like to see is, if people really supposedly like this card for its random and unpredictable elements, put more cards into the deck to make it more random, so we actually have that interesting, varied experience, which would hopefully naturally weaken the consistency of the deck, which I think is the problem. It's like, would getting leeched on 4 be annoying regardless? Sure. But if it's happening 1 out of 10 games instead of like 4 out of 10 games, I think you would be a lot less annoyed about it if it was happening less often.
Yeah.
So that's, I think we're all in agreement on that one. I think that's where you start. You put some more cards in the deck, you see what that does, and that's a number they can always change with time, where it's like, if it isn't enough, they can add more. If it's too many, they can do less. I think that's really the main knob they have to adjust on this card.
Yep. All right. I like it. Well, I don't remember how Blue Train wraps up the show, but I really appreciate everybody hanging out with us in chat today. SafetyBlade, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. It's always good to chat with you and hang out. And everybody else, we will see you next time. So until then, keep it Cosmo.
Keep it Cosmo.
Keep it Cosmo.
It's trying to play my Nuff Said, bub, but it's not working.
I didn't post.
I will talk to you guys later. Need to run. Thanks for letting me rant on my soapbox.
Absolutely, man. No, it was great.
You were very good at what you said. It did not feel complaining. You were trying to articulate your points, and I think you got them across well.
Yeah, okay. People take it as complaining. I'm like, no, I don't really care either way. Like, this is good. This is a game now. Like, I've came to peace with it.
Yeah, you kind of have to as a Marvel Snap content creator. People are going to think you're complaining anytime you say something that
You
is
say,
not just fully in praise of the game.